A blockbuster tonight on Benghazi. A claim U.S. forces could have intervened in the terror attack in time, and that the Obama administration is trying to intimidate potential whistleblowers into silence. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. Two major stories tonight on the Benghazi terror attack and what some lawmakers charge is a vast and growing cover-up concerning the assault that left 4 Americans dead, including the U.S. ambassador on 9/11. We still don't know how many people were injured that night. The administration insists those events have been investigated enough and that it's time to move on. We have Fox team coverage tonight with 2 explosive stories. Adam Housley in Los Angeles talks exclusively to a special operator who says military help was available, despite what the administration has said. But we begin with accusations that the president's people are making threats against Benghazi witnesses. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen reports from the State Department on an incredibly serious charge before Congress starts a new round of hearings. Good evening, James.
Brett, good evening. Secretary of State Kerry told House lawmakers earlier this month he doesn't want to spend the next year coming to Capitol Hill to talk about Benghazi, but new charges from within his own department could make that a reality. Fox News has learned that at least 3 career State Department employees and at least 1 more at the Central Intelligence Agency have retained lawyers or are in the process of doing so in order that they can provide sensitive information to Congress about Benghazi. The 4 consider themselves whistleblowers and want their counsel to receive the security clearances that would enable them to review classified documents. But the lawyer representing one of the employees at State told us the department is not providing a process for that, and even worse, is actively threatening her client and the others.
I'm not talking generally. I am talking specifically about Benghazi, that people have been threatened, and not just the State Department. That people have been threatened at the CIA. It's frightening, and they're taking career people and making them well aware that their careers will be over.
It was on September 11 that 4 Americans, including our ambassador to Libya, were killed in terror attacks on U.S. installations in Benghazi. Tunsing said her client has pertinent information on the months preceding the attacks, when pleas for enhanced security were rejected, on the 8-hour span of the attacks themselves, and on the 8-day period following the attacks, when the Obama administration falsely described them as the result of a spontaneous protest over a video.
So if you have additional questions or you think there's some document that somehow you need, I'll work with you to try to get it.
Secretary of State Kerry told lawmakers this month that Obama administration officials have testified at 8 Benghazi hearings, held 20 Benghazi briefings, turned over 25,000 pages of Benghazi documents, and released an unclassified version of the report prepared by the so-called Accountability Review Board. Today, Kerry's spokesman insisted all standard procedures have been followed in terms of cooperation with Congress.
I'm not aware of private counsel seeking security clearances or anything to that regard. I'm not aware of whistleblowers one way or another. Congress has its own prerogatives, but we've had a very thorough, independent investigation, which we completed and were transparent and shared, and there are many folks who are in a political manner trying to sort of use this for their own political means or ends.
That was a jab at Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California, chair of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, who wrote to Secretary of State Kerry last week, and I quote, "The department's unwillingness to make the process for clearing an attorney more transparent appears to be an effort to interfere with the rights of employees to furnish information to Congress," unquote. That, Brett, is obviously a charge the administration rejects.
James Rosen live at the State Department tonight. James, thank you. Now for the second part of this story. The administration has insisted from the beginning there was no help available for the Americans under assault in Libya. None that could arrive in time to change the outcome in Benghazi. Tonight is the first of 3 exclusive reports charging that claim is just not true. Because the special operator in this piece is fearful of reprisal, we have agreed to conceal his identity. Correspondent Adam Housley has the story.
Many Americans are asking, indeed, I asked myself, How could this happen?
In the 7 months since the Benghazi attacks on 9/11, information from the administration has been incomplete at best. Details and timelines provided by the State Department, the U.S. military, and the CIA have been contradictory and failed to answer many questions. In December, a State Department review concluded
there simply was not enough time for U.S. military forces to have made a difference. Having said that, it is not reasonable nor feasible to tether U.S. forces at the ready to respond to protect every high-risk post in the world.
But members of the military who are monitoring events in Benghazi disagree. Only a few dozen people in the world know what happened that night, and Fox News spoke exclusively with a special operator who watched the events unfold and has debriefed those who were part of the response.
I know for a fact that C-110, the EUCOM SIF, was doing a training exercise, not in the region of Northern Africa, but in Europe. And they had the ability to react and respond.
The C-110 is a commanders in extremis force. In layman's terms, a 40-man special operations force capable of rapid response and deployment, specifically trained for incidents like the attack in Benghazi. That night, they were training in Croatia, just 3.5 hours away.
We had the ability to load out, get on birds, and fly there at a minimum stage. C-110 had the ability to be there, in my opinion, 4 to 6 hours from their European theater to react.
They would have been there before the second attack.
They would have been there before the second attack. They would have been there at a minimum to provide a quick reaction force that could facilitate their exfil out of the problem situation. Nobody knew how it was going to develop. And you hear a whole bunch of people and a whole bunch of advisors say, hey, we wouldn't have sent them there because, you know, the security was an unknown situation.
No one knew that.
If it's an unknown situation, at a minimum, you send forces there to facilitate the exfil or medical injuries. We could have sent a C-130 at Benghazi to provide medical evacuation for the injured.
Our source says many connected to Benghazi feel threatened and are afraid to talk. So far, confidential sources have fed some information, but nobody has come forward publicly on camera until now.
The problem is, you know, you got guys in my position, you got guys in special operations community who are still active and still involved, and they would be decapitated if they came forward with information that could affect high-level commanders.
Despite the concern, our confidential source says the community feels there was a betrayal all the way to the top, and that people on the ground in Benghazi were left to fend for themselves.
I don't blame them for not coming forward. You know, it's something that's risky, especially in our line of profession, to say anything about anything in the realm of politics or that deals with policy.
Our source provides insight into how the U.S. government and military reacted from the moment the attack began through the immediate hours after Ambassador Chris Stevens went missing, what they were told to do and what not to do, as Stevens, diplomatic officer Sean Smith, and former special operations members Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty were killed.
There's a lot of responsibility, a lot of onus that needs to be taken up and accounted for.
The attack began about 9:30 p.m. on September 11, 2012 at a diplomatic compound in Benghazi and culminated roughly 7 hours later at a second location, a CIA annex about 1 mile away. While the official responses from Washington have been that the assets could not have made it to Benghazi in time to stop the second attack that killed Woods and Doherty, our source says otherwise and insists there were at least 2 elite military units that could have made it in time, including the one training in Croatia.
So besides those guys who went in on their own, we had 2 more assets that could have been there.
2 more assets that could have been on the ground. It's frustrating. It's upsetting, especially being in the community. The hardest thing to deal with in any kind of, you know, dangerous scenario or gunfight is, you know, we always look to each other to help each other, and that's how we get through situations. It's not about the assets overhead, it's about the guys on the ground.
He also says that as the attack began, there were at least 15 special forces and highly skilled State Department security staff available in the capital Tripoli who were not dispatched, even though they were trained as a quick response force. Meantime, a group of American reinforcements also in Tripoli, which included the CIA's global response agent Glenn Doherty and about 7 others, took matters into their own hands. A little-known fact which also contradicts the version of events in the State Department report. The team commandeered a small jet and flew to Benghazi to help try and secure the CIA annex still under fire. Doherty would eventually be killed on the roof along with his friend Tyrone Woods, and our source says these men deserve the highest Medal of Honor for their actions.
If it wasn't for that decision, I think we'd be talking completely different about this entire situation. I think you would be looking at either 20+ hostages loose, captured by IAQ, or you'd be looking at a lot of dead Americans dead in Benghazi.
We've heard some of these same details from a number of our other sources who have not yet come on camera, also some of our British sources on the ground that night. Brett, tomorrow more of our exclusive interview, including the hunt for those responsible or the hunt that's lack thereof. Brett?
Interesting story, Adam. Thank you. We'll look for part 2 tomorrow. What do you make of our first 2 stories tonight, and what do you think comes next? Let me know on Twitter. You can follow me at Brett Baer. Good evening. I'm Brett Baer. Our series of reports on the Benghazi terror attack and new allegations of intimidation and stonewalling from the administration in just a minute. First, President Obama is trying to soft-pedal phrases such as red line and game changer when it comes to Syria and chemical weapons, and substitute words like we don't know and would have to rethink. The complex and contradictory situation with Syria, part of a wide-ranging news conference this morning. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry, our man on the front row.
This time, President Obama never used the phrase red line, instead hedging on the threat he made just 8 months ago, that the use of chemical weapons by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad would lead to more dramatic U.S. action.
We don't know how they were used, when they were used, who used them. We don't have a chain of custody that establishes what exactly happened.
None of those caveats were highlighted when the president made this vow last August.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus.
Despite his own defense secretary Chuck Hagel and other top officials now declaring there is evidence chemical weapons have been used in Syria, the president hinted at the mistakes made in Iraq to say he needs to have clear facts to tie the weapons directly to Assad.
If I can establish in a way that not only the United States but also the international community feel confident is the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime, then that is a game changer.
You mean U.S. military action?
By game changer, I mean that we would have to rethink the range of options that are available to us.
Former Senator Joe Lieberman said that since over 70,000 Syrians have already been slaughtered, he was troubled by Mr. Obama's statements today.
We can't let this red line become fuzzy in a lot of international lawyering and the United Nations.
The president's hesitation may be reflected in a new CBS News New York Times poll, which found nearly 2/3 of the American public does not want military intervention. On the question of whether the U.S. has a responsibility in Syria, 62% said no, 24% said yes. The Syrian regime is trying to use that wariness to insist Assad is being framed.
What happened in Iraq, as I said, is still alive in our minds. Our region, ladies and gentlemen, is still living the consequences of such false allegations.
And there are new signs tonight that for the first time the White House may give lethal aid to the rebels in Syria rather than just the non-lethal aid they've been giving. White House spokeswoman Caitlin Hayden telling me just a moment ago, vehicles, armor, night vision goggles among the items now under discussion. What's significant about that, it would give the White House a chance to show they're being more aggressive about the situation in Syria, but still a step short of actual direct U.S. military intervention, Brett.
Okay, Ed, and the president was asked about Gitmo today.
He was. And remember, this was a big broken promise. The first week in office, the president said he'd close Gitmo within 1 year in office. Today, he blamed Congress, saying that they have sort of blocked his efforts. Republican Buck McKeon fired back that the president never put forth a real bipartisan plan that would work. The bottom line is, at this news conference today, the president said he will now, for the first time in the second term, saying he'll redouble his efforts to close Gitmo in this second term. There's clear signs tonight there's going to be a major battle on his hands to get that done, Brett.
Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. President Obama sidestepped a question about information we broke for you last night on an alleged campaign of threats and intimidation against possible whistleblowers tied to the Benghazi terror attack. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen has new reaction tonight.
The State Department pushed back against charges first aired Monday on Fox News, alleging that Benghazi whistleblowers who were preparing to cooperate with congressional investigators have faced threats and intimidation from their superiors at Foggy Bottom.
We have to demythologize this issue and certainly depoliticize it. American people deserve answers. I'm determined that this will be an accountable and open State Department as it has been in the past.
The State Department would never tolerate or sanction retaliation against whistleblowers on any issue, including this one. That's an obligation we take very seriously. Full stop.
President Obama professed to be unaware of long-standing efforts by GOP lawmakers to question survivors from the Benghazi attacks of September 11, in which terrorists killed the U.S. ambassador to Libya and 3 other Americans.
I'm not familiar with this notion that anybody's been blocked from testifying, so what I'll do is I will find out what exactly you're referring to.
On Monday, former Justice Department official Victoria Tunsing identified herself as one of the attorneys representing a potential Benghazi whistleblower. Still, the Obama administration says no such whistleblowers have come forward, and no lawyers representing them have requested security clearances to review classified materials. Yet Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California wrote to the State Department's number 2 lawyer, Mary McLeod, back on April 16, attorneys representing department personnel in this matter will require clearance to possess and discuss top secret and sensitive compartmented information.
They've had 2 letters from Chairman Issa, one on April 16th, the other one April 26th, that specifically say, we want you to provide a process for clearing a lawyer to receive classified information. How can they possibly get up there and just lie to the press corps?
And that's why we need to give them immunity. That's why we need a congressional investigation. The administration has lost its credibility.
Fox News has learned that the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, chaired by Congressman Issa, will hold a fresh round of hearings on Benghazi, Brett, with the first of them slated to occur on Wednesday of next week.
Okay, James, thank you. President Obama promised to get to the bottom of the Benghazi attack, so why are the perpetrators still free? Correspondent Adam Housley has part 2 of our exclusive investigation.
And make no mistake, justice will be done.
7 months and still no arrest or targeted killings after the brutal attack on 2 U.S. locations in Benghazi, Libya, killing 4 Americans, despite promises that those responsible would be hunted down and held accountable. However, multiple sources tell Fox News that the U.S. has identified the mastermind of the Benghazi attack, who is still in Libya and walks free.
We basically don't want to upset anybody. And the problem is, if Ambassador Stevens' family knew that we were sitting on information about the people who killed their son, their brother, and we could look them as a government in the face, then we're messing up. We're messing up.
Fox News spoke exclusively with this special operator who watched the events unfold in real time and has debriefed those who were part of the response. He remains anonymous for his safety and has decided to talk because he says he and others connected with the September 11th attacks in Benghazi are frustrated with the excuses, lies, and lack of a military response since Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans were killed.
We have all the capability, all the training, all the capacity to kill and capture not only terrorists involved with the specific events of 9/11 and Ambassador Stevens' death, but terrorists who are feeding other regions, including Europe, that eventually could affect our national security in the short term. And we're not talking midterm or long term. This is a short term.
The community is pretty frustrated.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a daily frustration.
Another threat, a larger terrorist haven that continues to build in parts of Libya and North Africa. Those working the region in the interest of United States security say plainly the ball's being dropped by top leaders at the White House, Pentagon, and State Department.
The second highest population of foreign fighters in the war in Iraq came from Benghazi, second to Saudi Arabia. So we're talking about a historic location and region that has fed foreign fighters to kill Americans and kill other coalition forces. The analysts, the intelligence experts that I work with all say the same thing, that if we just ignore the situation as it presents itself, eventually another invasion will have to take place for us to eventually turn the tide.
He says the region also remains a weapons hub after the overthrow of former leader Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, which saw massive stockpiles of weapons in Libya move freely across the Mediterranean and in many cases into Syria. While the U.S. has claimed a more active role to find and remove an estimated 20,000 shoulder-launched missiles called manpads, some Americans working the area say they're not allowed to take or even destroy the missiles because they have not been given the authority from their chain of command.
I have come across SA-7s in the hands of friendly forces, meaning, either surrogate military or police forces that wanted to be handed over, and I was unable to do that because there was no program in place. No government organizations were interested. No special operations organizations were interested.
Is it a little frustrating knowing that these friendly forces, potential friendly forces, or friendly people on the ground there were willing to pass along something that could fall into the hands of an adversary, and there was no plan in place to do it?
It was frustrating not only for myself, but for the men and the guys that I work with. We always talk amongst each other and discuss that, it's probably going to take a 747, a 757 to get shot down in Tripoli for somebody to pay attention to that, which is unfortunate.
Brett, looking for a response to the charge that the possible mastermind has been identified and walking around in Libya. We reached out to the State Department, the CIA, the Pentagon, and the FBI, and we received no official response or comment. Brett?
Okay, Adam, part 3 tomorrow. Thank you. Now to another terrorism case. The Obama administration is facing increasing pressure tonight after Fox News reports about charges of threats and intimidation directed against whistleblowers tied to the Benghazi terror attack. Some survivors and others with direct knowledge of the attack want to speak out. Today, the administration responded. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry has the story.
One day after President Obama said he was unaware of any potential whistleblowers wanting to come forward about the attacks in Benghazi,
I'm not familiar with it.
White House spokesman Jay Carney tried to turn the page on it once and for all.
Let's be clear. Benghazi happened a long time ago. We are unaware of any agency blocking an employee who would like to appear before Congress to provide information related to Benghazi.
Except in an unfortunate bit of timing, it was only today the FBI released these surveillance photos of 3 individuals who were on the grounds of the U.S. mission in Benghazi when it was attacked, leading to the deaths of 4 Americans. Republican attorney Victoria Tunzing today continued to insist she has an unnamed client who is one of several government officials ready to challenge the administration's account of what happened.
I'm a good lawyer. I don't talk in Perry Mason terms of blowing the lid off of something. I can tell you that with the various whistleblowers and the background that I know, there is information that is inconsistent with the administration scenario for the attack on Benghazi. I would tell you that with certainty.
Carney dismissed the idea that anyone is being muzzled and today pledged for the first time the White House will allow anyone who wants to testify to come forward.
Anybody who wants to be heard by Congress is welcome to be heard by Congress in our view, and that has been our approach, our cooperative approach to this matter.
To poke holes in Tunzing's claims, the administration released new letters from the Departments of State and Defense stamped in the last 24 hours since Fox asked the president whether government employees are being blocked from speaking out.
Ed, I'm not familiar with this notion that anybody's been blocked from testifying.
The new letters to Republican Congressman Darrell Issa insist insists that neither department has received requests from any employees who allegedly want private attorneys to get security clearances for access to classified information about Benghazi.
The State Department is playing cutesy with the wording, saying that the employee should come in and ask. In other words, the employee should go in without a lawyer and say, I want to be a whistleblower and would you help me find a lawyer? That's not how it should work.
Back on April 26th, ISA wrote Secretary of State John Kerry that, quote, numerous individuals have come forward with information related to the Benghazi attack and may need personal attorneys with security clearances. Today, Republican Senators John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and Kelly Ayotte fired off a letter to the president demanding he provide the names of all of the survivors of the Benghazi attacks. Now, Victoria Tonsing, meanwhile, told me today she's willing to take on any Democratic co-counsel to join the case and show that it's nonpartisan. She wants her unnamed client to testify at ICE's next hearing on May 8th. Brett?
Okay, Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. Much more on this with the panel. Tonight we conclude our three-part investigative series on the Benghazi attacks with an example of how not to respond to a crisis. Correspondent Adam Housley reports on accusations the Obama administration dropped the ball.
What difference at this point does it make?
The lack of action in Benghazi makes a big difference to multiple sources on the ground that night and others who witnessed the events unfold.
They had no plan. They had no contingency plans for what if this happens. And that's the problem that the State Department is going to face in the future. They're dealing with more hostile regions, hostile countries. This attack's going to happen again.
Our source, who was monitoring the events in Benghazi in real time, reveals the lack of reaction by the U.S. State Department, Pentagon, and the White House on the night 4 Americans were killed. He suggests more could have been done to save lives and asks were multiple security warnings ignored. This was the reason given by then Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta.
That you don't deploy forces into harm's way without knowing what's going on, without having some real-time information about what's taking place. And as a result of not having that kind of information, the commander who was on the ground or in that area, General Ham, General Dempsey, and I felt very strongly that we could not put forces at risk in that situation.
I could see the initial confusion in the beginning. You know, you have a situation that's developing. The problem with State Department is they don't have those procedures in place. And if they do, they haven't practiced or exercised them. And now, you know, they're making up for all the mistakes they made with excuse, and there is no excuse.
This is a breakdown between state and military.
Yeah, absolutely. Huge breakdown between state and military. The State Department and the Defense Department need to get on the same sheet of music.
Our source says as events unfolded the night of the attack, they fell under the authority of the Chief of Mission, the person in charge of security in the country, who in this case was Ambassador Chris Stevens. But once Stevens was cornered and members of a security detail pushed his distress button, that authority would have been transferred to his deputy. However, the deputy was out of the country. That meant the authority then reverted directly to the U.S. State Department, and oversight of the response to the attack fell to Secretary Clinton and Undersecretary of State for Management Patrick Kennedy. They were calling the shots, multiple State Department sources tell Fox, and Kennedy was in the operations center monitoring the radio traffic and distress calls. We're also told by multiple sources that shortly after the attack began, around 9:40 p.m., Special Forces put out a call sign for all available assets, military and otherwise, in the vicinity to be moved into position to help.
That enacts every asset, every element to respond, and it becomes a global priority.
Was that given?
I will tell you that was given, and the only reason it was given is because of the Special Operations Pact, because it has nothing to do with the agency. It has nothing to do with the Department of State.
So Special Operations gave the call sign?
Yes.
But assets didn't move.
Assets did not move.
The failure of the State Department or White House to give the military permission to cross into Libya to help, according to our source, only accentuates the significant breakdown in communication between the State Department, the U.S. military, CIA, and White House that culminated in the lack of action the night of the Benghazi attack.
The problem with State Department is, you know, you have a diplomatic function. The diplomatic function is to build rapport and commerce and whatever foreign affairs element that's related to it. The military specifically does targeting. We specifically look at individuals. There's not good communication between the State Department and the Department of Defense on any level, absolutely no level.
This claim contradicts the report of the State Department Accountability Review Board, which says in part, Washington, Tripoli, Benghazi communication, cooperation, and coordination on the night of the attacks were effective.
It's horrible. When you're on the ground, you depend on each other. We're going to get through this situation, but when you look up and then nothing outside of the stratosphere is coming to help you or rescue you, that's a bad feeling.
4 American lives were lost that night and 6 others injured.
My whole reason for sitting in this seat, if this could get somebody off their butt to poke somebody in the chest to make a decision for my guys to do their job and to finish their job, then I've kind of feel like I've done my work here.
Brett, he is the first source again to step in front of a camera and talk about Benghazi with direct connections. It took incredible courage to do so. He says he still feels threatened even though he gave us no classified information whatsoever. We do continue to talk to other sources that have connections that night. They yet have not decided to step in front of a camera. Brett?
Adam, excellent series of reports, and again, we welcome any folks to speak out on this story that we've been covering from the beginning. Adam, thank you.